Hello everyone, and welcome back to my series of videos on making a small pipe organ from scratch. We're on to part 4 now of the soundwall wind chest, and we're going to do the pallets. Finish the wind chest, put it to bed and move on to the wooden pipes. Those of you who are really eagle-eyed will have noticed I'm not in the workshop today. I'm currently on tour in Europe doing some Bach cantatas in Versailles and Leipzig. Tonight's concert is in Versailles in the Royal Chapel. You can just see the top of the building there with the gold dripping off the roof in the gardens. Sorry about the sound quality, competing with a bit of a breeze and the gardeners, but this place is outrageous. You can begin to realise when you visit it why they lopped their heads off. But anyway, on to part 4, the pallets, and thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. Right, on with the pallets. For those of you who don't know what the pallets are, they're basically the valves that let the wind through to the pipe. So when you press the key down, the pallet opens and the wind from the well releases through into the grid and up to the upper boards and therefore to the pipes. Now, I've made all the blanks for the pallets, so what I'm doing now is drilling the pivot holes at the back. Traditional way would be to use leather hinges, but I prefer to use removable pallets, especially in these sort of instruments where they can be moved to different environments and different humidity, and they can walk, they can move around. Although I don't tend to have a problem like that, but there is potentially a problem for them to move. And obviously, if they twist, they let wind through, and that is called a cipher, where the note sounds without pressing a key. So I'm using pins at the back of the pallets, and these are drilled along with the countersink for the spring, which you'll see later. And here I'm gluing on some guides, some homemade guides at the back, which just keep the pallet from twisting on the pin, so they keep it upright on the pin. So I'll put that on a dummy pin and place the guide on and just do a little glue rub joint. That's fine. The glue's more than strong enough, doesn't need clamping. Pull it off, let that dry. Again, the good old Type Bond original glue. The guides are made of lime. They don't need to be hard. The softer the better. They don't make less noise. So it's actually lime as a softwood, and it's beautiful to machine. You can get a nice crisp edge. So we've got to do another 50 odd of these pallets. They range in size, so they obviously get larger in the base because you've got larger grid spaces in the base, letting more wind through. So they're very slightly oversized, so what I'm doing now is just cleaning them up and making them flush with a block plate. The pallets are made out of spruce or pine, nice and stable, just all you need. Crucial that they don't twist or warp or bend, as for the reasons I've stated before. So again, we've got another 54 to be precise. 54 keys, 54 pallets, 54 pipes in a stop. So all in all, there will be 3 times 54 pipes in the organ. Do the maths. Now I'm just trimming off I'm not trimming it, I'm making a rebate basically, so that there's a slight step back, so that there's a little you want as little friction as possible, which I was saying about the pins going through the grid. You want as little friction from the keys as possible, so I'm just relieving the pallets so that when they do move up and down against the guide pins, There'll be as little material as possible touching the pins. So now we've got to dress the pallets with felt and leather. This is suede leather. It's called Persian suede. Lovely and soft, and it beds beautifully onto the grid, making a perfect seal, because you don't want them to leak for obvious reasons. So I'm just pinning down the leather onto a board to make it easier to glue, basically. So I'll use the roller glue dispenser so that the leather doesn't move about as I'm gluing. Again, Type 1 original. You want plenty of glue on the leather because it's going to seep into the felt, obviously, so you want a decent amount of glue on there, and this little roller does that beautifully. You can see the way the leather's kept in place as well. Don't have to worry about it moving around and lifting. So plenty of glue, and then make sure it's fully covered, obviously. And we've placed the felt. This is actually synthetic felt. I used to use 100% wool, and it's quite difficult to get hold of now. It's very expensive. This does a perfect job. It's nice, and the thickness is very even, and it does just as good a job as the genuine wool felt for a quarter of the price. Now I don't have to clamp this. I'll just beat it down and rub it down, and I don't want to compress the felt and make it hard. The whole idea of having the felt as well as the leather gives you a little bit of a cushion, so it takes up any slight intolerances in the movements or whatever in the pallet. And that's all I'll need to do now. I'll just leave that to dry on a flat piece of ply, like blockboard there. And we're ready to start. Oh no, but first we want to make sure that all the pallets are absolutely straight and true. So I've just put a large plane upside down in the vise and going with the grain, just making sure nothing. These pallets have been made for a couple of weeks now, so they've settled. They should have settled down. If they're going to move, they will have moved by now. Just having a good look at them before moving on to the next one. You see a little sort of squiggles on the plane. I'm very keen on using wax, candle wax. That's all it is. And if you put it on a plane, it makes life an awful lot easier, much less friction, and makes the plane move much nicer. Top tip. So we've got another 50 of those to do. I always make a couple of extras just in case, because things can go wrong when you're gluing the felt and leather on, and so there's a couple of extra pallets per size. So then we move on to preparing the felt and leather. Now we want a nice straight edge to work from. So sharpening the trusty old kitchen knife on the strop. This always scares me when I do this. When I was training, there was a chap who did this, and he, I don't want to go into details, but he basically sliced the end of his fingers off. You can see, you can leave your fingers exposed very easily. Just have to be thinking about that. Anyway, then I'll put a straight edge 8 or 9 millimeters with an 8 or 9 millimeter gap away between the felt and the straight edge for the leave a space for the pivot pin hole, and you'll see that when I glue the pallets. Now we're ready to start gluing. So I need plenty of glue on this. Again, it's going to seep into the felt, so we don't want to underdo. We want a liberal amount of liberal amount of glue. Get good contact. I've got just a slab of MDF here. The first use for this is to get the first one square on the felt, and then the slab will double up as a weight. So that'll be placed on there with a weight on it, and I'll move that along as we proceed down the line. I'm going to try and give you another view of this and see the process. Now I can't just glue this pallet hard up against the other one because I need room for the knife blade to when I separate the pallets on the felt and leather. So all I'm doing is a very, very thin steel rule, which is about 0.5 millimeter thick. Put that in between each pallet, move the weight along, and then pull out the rule. And here it is from the other side, or from the front view. So plenty of glue. The steel rule goes in between the previous pallet and the new pallet. Move the weight along, pull out the ruler, and just check that it doesn't move as you pull the ruler out. And then they're all done. Now for this, I've used all sorts of knives in the past. I've never got on with anything as well as good old-fashioned Stanley knife blade or utility knife blade. Just put a new blade in, and it'll do all of these in one. It's just the right length to penetrate through to the felt and leather. You don't really want to have to take more than one swipe at this. You want it as clean as possible, and that's coming off with just one stroke of the knife. And actually, the blade is completely concealed in between the pallets. It makes it safe. We'll fast forward this.
Ilse Weber's husband Willy survived the Holocaust. He'd hidden copies of his wife's songs and poems in the tool shed where he worked at Terezin. In 1946 he returned to recover the papers, thus ensuring that Ilse Weber's name lives on.
And then we move on to making the pivot pins, or the pins at the back of the hinge pins. This is TIG wire, basically TIG welding wires, 2.5 millimeter wire. We're just cutting them off on the guillotine. It's much cheaper and more flexible. You can do any length doing it this way, rather than buying ready-made pins. It's much cheaper, and again, you can do any size pins you want. I'll do the same for the keyboard as well. Use the same process. And we just clean up one end, because the other end doesn't matter, that goes into the grid. And then we've got to make the guide pins. So the guide pins sit in between each pallet. This is 1mm hardened wire. It's incredibly, I can't remember what it is actually, but it's incredibly hard and stays put. And so they're the guide pins going in the front. All these holes have been drilled. I think I showed that in the grid video. I hope so. Just tap them in loosely, and then we just use a block with a hole in it to get them all the same height. And I'll do half a dozen of these, and then I'll do half a dozen of the hinge pins as well. I'm not going to show you all of them, don't worry. So then the hinge pins go down into the, if you remember from the grid video, which I hope you've watched, there are spacers underneath this this pallet table, if you want to, whatever you want to call it. And this was, they had two reasons. One was to keep the bars evenly apart when you glue the table on, and the other reason was to give these pins some substance or some depth of wood for them to bite. Because just going through 4mm MDF, obviously it wouldn't be enough. So they're going through into the spaces underneath, and there they all are, ready to have the pallets fitted. So we just brush off the leather, making sure it's nice and clean. We open up the pivot hole at the back slightly with a pointer so that it's not loose but not tight, and then just check the movement, and then checking there's no friction on that at all, because any friction on there, you will feel that on the key when you're playing. Do you see that it's returning under its own weight? So everything we do, as far as the action is concerned, is critical for the touch that you get from the keys when you play it. So the less friction you've got through the whole process from the key down through the register, through the sticker or tracker, down onto the pallet, through the grid and onto the pallet. You want as little friction as possible. I've mentioned this before, it's probably getting very boring talking about it, but it's absolutely critical because you want every single key to feel the same. And that is also when you put the pallet springs in, which I'll show you at the end of this video, that they have to be exactly the same strength so you get the same feel for each key. It just makes it much, much more comfortable to play, and people do like my actions, which is, it's nice to know because I take a lot of trouble. Now we've got to make there was a countersink that went onto the pallet. This is the countersink that goes down onto the bottom board, and it doesn't actually go on the bottom board. There's a separate strip of pine which I use, which we screwed down onto the bottom board, and which will line up with the pallet. So this countersink will be directly below the countersink on the pallet, and when I put the springs in, you'll see where this comes to play. The only other thing we need to do now is make the guide for the back of the spring so the spring isn't flopping about. We need a guide for it to stay straight. There's just a strip of beech I've machined here and marked a pencil line from the drawing, and you'll see a little bit of masking tape on the bed of the saw there. That's just got a very fine pen line or pencil line, so I just line up the pencil lines on the line. This is not totally critical, but it's nice to get them as even as possible. And you'll see in the final section how this works. This will be glued to the back of that countersunk plate I'd made for the pallet springs, and there it is upside down now in the well. So the last process is to put the springs in. This is done by a homemade tool, which you can see here. It's just something I made when I was training. And it holds the pallets. Holds the springs tight until you disengage it, and it plops down to the countersink on the pallet. Now you see what I mean now by the two countersinks for the legs of the springs, holds them in place, and the guide at the back which stops the springs from moving when they're opening and closing. You'll see two little pencil lines that I'm holding the springs up to. I've actually checked all these springs before doing this. They need to be exactly the same distance apart, the legs, so you get the same feel for each key. And that is the soundboard or wind chest complete. I will have to make a faceboard that goes over the gap here, that holds the wind in obviously. But that will come later when I make the casework. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I look forward to the next episode, which we're going to start the wooden pipes.
Thank you for watching that, everyone, and I thought you might like to see the inside of the chapel. Over here, part of the perks of this job is you get in well before everyone else to these amazing places, and this is just one of the best places to be. At the moment all the tourists are locked out and my man in here, and it's a real privilege. Anyway, the organ's set up for the beginning of the rehearsal this afternoon. For those Bach nerds out there, it's BWV 146, where the organ plays a very prominent part. And well, thank you for watching, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you for part 5 of making the wooden pipes. Like and subscribe.